Today's episode is brought to you by Dr. Jeffrey Halstead, DMD. Dr. Jeffrey Halstead has been Canandaigua's hometown dentist for more than 35 years, offering routine dental care as well as cosmetic dentistry, implants, and dentures by their highly trained and experienced staff. Visit them online at canandaiguadentistry.com or find them on Facebook and Instagram. For FingerLakes1.com, this is the Debrief Podcast. I'm Josh Durso, joined as always by Jackie Augustine. We are about 10 days removed from Election Day, and as I've said to several people over the last couple of days, things are unofficially official, right? Basically.
Except Ward 6 in Geneva.
Except Ward 6, which we're going to talk about in a little while,
okay,
because it's weird. It's in a really weird spot at this point.
It's weird.
But interesting election. Turnout was kind of mixed. It wasn't as bad as I think I thought it was going to be coming into it. It was better than what I thought. But when I look back at the last few local election cycles, I think most counties in the region outpaced by like a percentage point or two, which I guess we got to feel good about.
Yeah, it's a trend in the right direction, even though it's not excellent. But yeah.
My biggest pet peeve that I have at this point, because now we're in the counting absentees, affidavit, all that good stuff. We need to figure out a way for counties to get unified in how they report after Election Day. There's so much emphasis put on getting results out, which we'll talk about one county that really struggled with that on election night. But we put so much emphasis on election night that when the absentees come due, and I know there's like, you've got the 10-day window and you've got different kind of like clocks that are running.
Right.
There isn't a lot of communication from a lot of the boards of election across the region to residents about when things are going to be going online. Like I've just been checking every day now for the last 3 days to see what absentee ballots have been added to totals, and a lot of counties still have not added anything since election night. And I think that's a big miss, especially when you have so many races that after election night were simply unresolved. We weren't even close to final.
Yeah, and I don't know if under state law they're required to report at a particular interval. I don't think so. I think it's kind of at their discretion. But, you know, they've got absentee ballots, affidavit ballots. Then they've got military absentees, which get like an additional length of time, right? Yeah. So to your point, it would be helpful if they were able to say, we sent out this many absentee ballots. They are in the following categories. On election night, we had X number of votes that were affidavit, which the policy for that is first they have to be confirmed and determined that they're valid votes, and then they're counted. More information. I think sometimes what happens, at least in Ontario County, is that the elections commissioners, right? So there's a full-time elections commissioner for the Republicans and the full-time for the Democrats. I think they're communicating pretty frequently with the party chairs. Right. And so the party chairs know what's going on, and then they tell their candidates what to expect. But like you said, here we are, like just the people. And it would be nice to know, because in some cases where the race is very close, like for example, where it's very close, in Ward 6, I think if people felt like, wow, there are 10 outstanding absentee ballots, maybe people would go to the Board of Elections to see that process and learn about how that works or something. But if you feel like, well, there aren't any votes anyway, so it's not going to make a difference, it just, more information, again, would be helpful.
Yeah, and it's, a few lines of text on a website, right? I mean, we're not talking about, condition or fashioning an entire report. We're just talking about some dates that could probably be put up like weeks before election actually happens. Like on this date, we do this, on this date, we do this. And typically we have results figured out by X time.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, that it doesn't, because I understand the commissioners in their defense would say the week before the election and election day are just so busy. Like, what more do you want from us? And I understand that. But, in the day of modern technology, it seems like you could have a lot of this stuff pre-populated from the beginning, a couple weeks out. Here's what we're going to do. And then the day before the election, you say, okay, we sent out, this many absentee. Well, I mean, they could even tell us after the absentee ballot request deadline, they could indicate this is how many requests we got. That doesn't mean they're all going to be returned. And most of the time they aren't, large percentage are not returned. But at least that would give people an understanding about the process, because there are still people who are older, who have been around a lot longer and have seen many elections, who still, surprising to me, seem to be really confused about the fact that an election result could change the week or 10 days after the election. And it's like, yeah, that's not unusual. That happens a lot, especially in these local elections with a small number of voters. But if there were more information, people would be less surprised by that.
Part of me feels like the reason why we see the lack of communication after Election Day is at least partly due to the fact that historically a lot of these BOEs have seen reporters come to their offices to watch them count these ballots when they're actually, but news has shrunk. The news business has shrunk so much that most organizations do not have reporters to send to every BOE office.
Right.
So it's one of these scenarios where it's to their advantage to get that information out as efficiently as humanly possible so that people who don't want to go through the news media to find out who won or lost can get that information right away, just is the same way that we go about obtaining it.
Yeah.
Another item that was kind of interesting, Democrats, by and large, across our entire coverage area, performed really, really well. There were a couple examples that we'll talk about later in the show where a Republican and conservative candidate split the vote and cleared way for Democrats to win. Not saying that it would have necessarily changed outcomes, but when you look at the results and you see, kind of a 8,000, 4,000, 4,000 vote split, you think to yourself, well, geez,
right,
what would that have outcome looked like had Republicans and conservatives been on the same page? There were quite a few races in Cayuga County in particular where Republicans and conservatives did not have the same candidate on the ballot. And in most of those cases, Democrats were successful, which is just kind of a testament to, if you want to win, a third party candidate is not a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, of course, again, here comes Geneva as the outlier, not following the trend of all of the other areas
pretty much
around
everywhere.
us or anywhere else that's an up and coming community. Well, I suppose we'll talk about that.
We're going to get to that in a minute. But first, we need to talk about Wayne County. Wayne County's got some problems.
Yes.
I have been complaining remember when we used to do our election night show here on fingerlakes1.com? Yep. I would get so frustrated trying to find results while I'm also hosting.
Right.
And we'd be waiting. It's 11 o'clock. It's 11:15. We've been on the air for going on 3 hours, and Wayne County still hasn't published results. So I wasn't that surprised when I'm sitting at my house getting results populated from across the region, and I look down at the clock in the corner of my screen, and I see it's 11:45, and there's still no results for Wayne County. As a matter of fact, I think I was texting you.
Yes.
We were texting, and I said, unsurprisingly, here we are, Wayne County. I'm waiting for them to populate something, and you're like, there's nothing on their website at all. And I'm like, yeah. They finally get results up the next day at lunchtime.
See, I gave up. Good for you.
Right. You gave up. Like most other people
wore me
did.
down.
Most everybody gave up. So it was due to a technical issue with the flash drives in a couple of machines at 2 polling locations in the county. So it didn't actually screw up how like votes were counted or anything like that.
Sure.
It just made it so that they couldn't get the numbers correct that night. So they work on it night, they work on it in the morning, and they finally get them up the next day around noon. Obviously, Wayne County officials, the county manager or county administrator rather, obviously the supervisors, the board of supervisors, everyone was hearing complaints. From mostly voters and residents, I'm assuming, because not that much media is really covering Wayne County, so other than us and maybe a couple TV stations. So there wasn't a lot of pressure on that side. But man, did they feel it. And one of the most fascinating nuggets that came out of the last week or so since we've had this epiphany with Wayne County is that they don't have a full-time election commissioner.
Right.
They have 0 full-time election commissioners. They have 2 part-time election commissioners, which is just a remarkable thing in my mind. Only county in the region that has part-time election commissioners. And with all of the distrust in the electoral process that exists in the United States right now, to have part-time election commissioners feels negligent.
Yeah, and at first I thought, well, maybe it's the case that they just rely more on, their local town officials and their clerks to do administration of the elections. But that's not the case. So it really is a county operation that is understaffed. And again, like you said, we can say we understand that the inability to get and tabulate the data in a timely way does not mean that the data was somehow corrupted or missing, right? There was no foul play or weird circumstance. It was a failure both of technology and of manpower. Because again, if you have 2 part-time people trying to respond to all this countywide, there's only so much that they can do. But I guess it did shine a pretty big light on that. And it'll be interesting to see if that is something that they correct quickly, both in terms of the technology that they're using for the election and also in terms of staffing.
Yeah, it does appear as though the county board of supervisors is very intent now on moving to a full-time system.
Well, good.
Which it's kind of baffling that it takes a situation like that to get you there when you I can only imagine that Wayne County being the last county to report election results for as long as I've been here at Finger Lakes 1 has probably had something to do with the fact that they have 2 part-time election commissioners.
Well, it just never occurred to us to ask, right? Because we just assumed that they were set up like every other county might have been. We probably should have asked earlier, why is this taking so long? But
and by the way, we're talking, like any municipal budget. Wayne County, I'm assuming, has a budget that exceeds $80 million. We're talking about, $110,000, $120,000 annually for 2 election commissioners, makes $60,000, $70,000 a year.
Yeah, I guess it would be the difference over what they're being paid right now, which I don't know, but
not enough money to allow that type of chaos to unfold every year for the rest of time. Let's talk Ontario County, shall we? Republicans dominated the countywide races, which I don't think is a huge surprise, or at least it wasn't to me. I feel like that's usually how that trends out. Democrats sweep in Canandaigua, but struggle in Geneva. Before we go any further, I guess the first question to answer is, why do we feel like that happened? And obviously, for full disclosure, I'm sure some of the folks who listen to the show also listen to Evan Dawson's Connections program on NPR, WXXI in Rochester, and that was a topic of discussion on his show last week. You and I have been talking about this offline as well. When you think about the why of why it went one way in Canandaigua and went another way in Geneva, what's your feeling?
Well, originally I would have said that it had a lot to do with the negative campaigning from the Republicans, right? Because this is the first year Well, I mean, they've done this they've had this, what I call the November surprise, every year since 2011. But usually the League of Women Voters would put out a no negative campaigning kind of agreement that the candidates would sign. And then some of the stuff that they would do would be issues based. So they would say that didn't apply, that the Republicans would say that didn't apply. But this year, what went out was so mean-spirited and terrible, right? I thought, oh my goodness, like people fell for it. But then I wrote a column about it, and the response I've been getting is that it did have an effect. Sorry, I keep hitting the microphone. It did have an effect, but the effect was that it just made people convinced that there was no point in voting because the Republicans are ridiculous. So people who might be like, why vote for them? And then the flyer itself made it look like the Democrats didn't have their act together. So I think it suppressed the vote. So and we know in Geneva, if you look at like the actual registration numbers, a depressed or suppressed voter turnout will favor a Republican outcome. And so the worry that I have now, I think I misdiagnosed it. Initially, I thought, it's these couple of old guys that everybody says hate everybody, right? And they're just doing their thing, trying to get everybody angry. And then I realized, maybe it's actually more insidious than that. Maybe it's that they really just don't want people to vote. They want people to check out. And that is concerning to me because I think if that's the takeaway, Geneva needs an engaged citizenry. We're at like a really critical point right now where the city could go either way. I mean, we've talked about on this show some of the issues facing Geneva in terms of trying to make a name for itself in the region and capitalize on positive trends and avoid some really negative trends. And it just feels like in this election, there were people really willing to lean into the idea that better that the city should suffer than Democrats get elected. And that's what I'm concerned about going forward. So I've reached out, I've reached out to some of what I consider to be the reasonable Republicans because they exist, right? There are like reasonable, decent people who care about the city and just have different points of view than Democrats to try to say like, hey, is there any way forward here that actually brings people together and kind of is able to work with the council that got elected, which is an odd mix. But I haven't heard anything back yet.
I guess the thing that I don't really understand is, and it kind of connects to the mailers, Democrats were painted, especially coming down the stretch, as these ultra-progressive, the candidates running were these ultra-progressive, super liberal, socialist candidates.
Or whatever word you want to use. I feel like they use a lot of adjectives that interchangeably that aren't identical, but whatever. Yes.
And they just weren't.
Right. I know.
Like they were mostly pro-police. All the ones I interviewed were pro-police. Yeah. Pro maintaining the police force, first responder services, pro basically maintaining all the things that Republicans say they want to maintain in Geneva.
And being fiscally conservative, actually.
It's the result or the outcome feels so out of body from what we actually saw out of from the candidates that it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think I think in a lot of ways, my concern with Geneva at this point from the outside is that the people who are most engaged voting are the people who are most afraid of change of any sort.
Yeah.
And
yes.
The Geneva that they recall from, I guess, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, when life in America was different, is the Geneva that they want to see. But here's the thing. You can push for that. You can go for that, right? But you're going to push yourself toward extinction as a community, because that next generation that would slowly integrate and slowly become involved, the things that they were talking about, I think of Will Wolf, I think of Cassie Snyder, the things they were talking about in their campaign are the things that people 55 and older should be really, really, really scared about. If a 30-year-old can't afford to rent a home, much less buy a home in the city of Geneva, if your tax base is in poor shape now, what's your tax base going to look like in 10 years when those people have just packed up and left?
Right.
Like, it's almost like they're living in this bubble of like, well, my ecosystem is nice now. I just want what I have now. Just don't affect what I have now. Except
they don't, because that's the thing. It's also the group that's complaining the most about the way things are.
So, which is why I come back to when I get done with that whole like logical thought process, I come to elections have consequences. And at the end of the day, the people who are making those decisions now, not willing to open their mind or willing to let fear drive how they build their community for the future, there are going to be consequences to those decisions. And you're running out of time. Every community across the whole region is facing some form of this right now, where it's becoming less and less viable for communities in the Finger Lakes to maintain themselves. When you really look long term, there's going to be consequences to the kinds of fear-based decision making that we've really seen take hold in Geneva.
Right. Well, that's
tough.
That's what I'm really afraid of. Fear-based. Here we go. But
different kind of fear.
Different kind of fear. Like you said, it is the consequences, because people want to make that knee-jerk voting reaction of, like, that, I heard this, so I'm not voting for that person because, that's scary and new and different. And like you said, that is going to cause people who are new to Geneva or considering Geneva to look at what their other options might be, right? Because if we have a particular reputation, people might select a different place to live, or the situations that are perpetuated and we don't have the I don't want to say the brain power. I will say the policy chops to deal with. If we don't address some of the things that were identified by the majority of the candidates who bothered to participate in policy-based discussions prior to the election, if we don't do that, like you said, the people have voted against their own interests, and I think it's easy for some of us to just kind of throw our hands up and say, fine, like, you made your bed, now lie in it, right? We'll see what happens the next 4 years. But really, those of us who are paying attention to stuff can't step away, can't let that happen. So it's just like a new grind. It's a new, how do we educate people about what they really did, and now how we make something good out of it and what needs to change.
I'm reminded of my conversation with Michael Mills, who won in Canandaigua, and all of the Democrats who were running for city council in Canandaigua. Their number one concern, their number one fear was, or is, Canandaigua eventually, potentially, turning into a ski resort community where you have 6 months of vibrant economic activity while the weather's nice, and then everything folds up, everything shuts down, and your community is basically reduced to college students and Airbnb guests.
Right.
That is not, you cannot sustain the type of infrastructure, the type of services that a city has, and frankly, the residents expect and deserve,
right,
with that kind of community makeup. You can't.
No, and you, again, the people that you're electing are the people who have to help solve these problems. And Canandaigua's gotten really serious about their flooding issues. Geneva had a meeting about flooding the other day, and the majority of the people who went were people who didn't win this election. The people who won the election weren't there. And it's like, oh my goodness, like we're already behind the 8 ball now. So yeah.
It's tough.
It is tough.
Ward 6. Coin toss, not a coin toss. So we've got a tie.
Right. I guess they have to do a recount, right? Is that done yet?
Right. So there's a recount has to happen.
Right.
There are differing opinions about whether it should be a coin toss or whether a majority of city council appointment. So you've got coin toss is one option. City council appointment is another option. Neither of those options sound great to me.
I think they might both be wrong also, because under state election law, if it's a failure to elect, then really there has to be a special election.
Oh, runoff. Give us a runoff.
But I don't know if I don't think it would be called a runoff. I think it would be called a special election. But the question then is like, does that mean the seat is vacant until you have that special election? Like, would you have to run it in the spring when the school board election is? Or is it, because it's supposed to be at the next practicable time. So again, is that with the school board election, is that the next fall, November election day? Is it an interim appointment? Because the seat will become vacant on January 1st. But if it's just an appointment, like you're not allowed to negate the will of the voters. So it's not like nobody voted.
Right.
So, and it's not like someone was elected but resigned. So it's not an organically generated vacancy. So it's in this weird gray area that I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. So I was trying to read the election law and I'm like, okay, I don't see coin toss. Other states, they do a coin toss. Because again, they say that that's preserving the will of the voters. People did come out and vote. It was a dead heat, but they want the seat filled, so we got to flip a coin. The problem with an appointment is that if it's left to council, they could introduce someone that wasn't even on the ballot. And if they do that, that is ignoring the will of the voters. So I don't know.
That's very interesting.
I don't know.
Expectations. What are you? We were kind of talking before we came on here a little bit about what we thought this city council may or may not be able to accomplish. I'm going to take everybody at their word who I interviewed. And I'm going to assume that this could be one of the most efficient city councils ever, based on the things that people sat over there in that couch and said to me while they were running. Now, of course, people say things when they're campaigning, and who knows what, real life actually gives us.
Well, and that's difficult because you only had 4 people who got elected who actually sat on this couch. So you don't even have a majority of people who were talking about their collegial, efficient activity.
I'm going to assume that the folks who won re-election and opted not to come here, since they've been saying in other places, including online, that they want to work with city council and they want to be good councilmen that they will. I don't. It's not very scientific, but that's my assumption.
I think we should assume that. I think it's good to be optimistic, and I think you're right that they set a high bar, and we will see how that works out. I will try to be optimistic.
I'll pull the curtain back a little bit here personally. I look at all of the candidates, all of the people who were elected. Mm-hmm. I take their party affiliation out of the equation, and I see a lot of like-minded people there. And I think based on the things they said they wanted to accomplish, and the things that they publicly stated they were in favor of, they should be able to get things done. So I would assume that the next 4 years for them, 2 years, because we're staggering things now.
Yeah.
I would assume that at least next year could be a fruitful one for city council. We'll see if it happens. But I'm feeling optimistic this afternoon. Seneca County, Seneca Falls, let's talk a little bit about that. John Nabinger wins the district attorney's race. Schmitter, Pilara, Dyson win in Seneca Falls. So ironically enough, we have a bunch of new faces on Seneca Falls Town Board, which obviously, as it pertains to the landfill stuff, has been the thing coming into it that a lot of folks were curious about or concerned about. But in terms of affiliation and what the numbers are, it's the same. It's still 3-2. You got 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats, no change there. The incumbents won the seats on the Waterloo Town Board. Landfill obviously there were a lot of flyers by the Progressive Waste parent company, corporate monster, super PAC, whatever they are. And a lot of folks were concerned about that, but Waterloo Town Board doesn't have a lot of legislative power over the landfill anyway, so not a huge deal there. God, when I sat down and I looked at the results and I looked at the vote totals and I thought back to the interviews that I did with the candidates in Seneca Falls and Seneca County, I interviewed both of the town supervisor candidates. I interviewed everybody who was running for town council except for Dawn Dyson. And my feeling at this point is making big promises on infrastructure and housing won the day. Like those were the things that people clearly cared about more than the landfill. I hate to say it. And this is kind of my opinion on where Seneca Falls is now politically. Seneca Falls has been dominated by big personalities for 8 to 12 years. That's like 3.5. We'll call it like 3.5-ish 4-year cycles. And people are very clearly just looking for something that's more measured, thoughtful, careful, contained, those types of words. And I think the outcome points to that. The people who were elected, I'll use Dawn Dyson as an example. I have not had a single conversation with her as a reporter, as a journalist since she was elected. She has not come in to do any kind of press in lead up to any elections. She did very little marketing of herself in any way, shape, or form through this most recent election cycle. Just shows up to board meetings, just does the thing, and that's it. When you look at, when I listen to Jackson, Pilara talk, I hear a candidate, or I hear now an elected official who is very measured, very careful, and has opinions, but also isn't trying to be the loudest voice in the room. And in a lot of ways, Frank Schmitter was that contrasting, non-authoritative voice to Supervisor Ferrara. And when you look at who won, I think that is to me the takeaway. Now, the big question is, how does this body govern moving forward when we're talking about Seneca Falls Town Board? When these bigger ticket issues start to crop up, landfill, infrastructure, housing maybe not as much, but those other two, they have in the past been hot button issues, infrastructure a little more sneakily, but landfill especially, how does this board handle that under that microscope? We're going to have to see in the next, say, 4 to 6 months.
Well, I like that analysis, and I feel like it sounds like what you're saying is that people would like some governing. They would like some problem solving and some cooperation and some addressing of key issues like housing and infrastructure. And then somehow an approach to those issues they are trusting will weigh in a well-informed, well-intentioned way on these big ticket items.
Yeah.
Am I hearing that right?
Yeah.
I think that's so. I mean, I think that's great. I think that's optimistic. I hope that's true.
It feels a little surface level to me. Like it feels like in some ways, maybe voters didn't care as much about substance as they did about just having representatives with a personality that they felt aligned more with what they wanted to see out of town government. Maybe that's a bit of a cynical viewpoint of it.
No, I don't think that's cynical, because I think people are looking for a particular disposition, right? Because you want people that are measured and careful and don't lose patience and can do the hard work and can achieve consensus and can move things forward. So I think I think, like you said, if someone's not a big bombastic personality that's trying to take up a lot of the space and, yell at other people, as like you said, as being socialists or whatever, then maybe governing gets done.
Yeah, and like some people in Seneca Falls will probably listen to what I just said and think that I'm, that's a slight towards Mike Ferrara or it isn't. Like when I sat here and I listened to both candidates talk about what they had done or what they wanted to do, Mike Ferrara was able to point to specific things that he has done as town supervisor on infrastructure that the challenger could not. And he had, if we're talking about which candidate had more data and examples at their fingertips, Mike was that candidate, which is part of the reason, which to me is like ultimately the one piece of analysis, I guess, that brings me to that point where personality really was more important, because Frank had a lot of ideas, but the incumbent always has the advantage of being in government, right? Like they have the advantage of knowing all of the things, knowing all the stuff that's been happening day to day. And if they're good at recalling that stuff and firing it off, they can sound like the more refined, prepared candidate. Right. But at the end of the day, I think in this case, personality was the thing that maybe drove it more. It's interesting. We'll see. I will say, if the Seneca Falls Town Board is going to choose this moment, these next 4 years, to be a little calmer, I think everybody in Seneca Falls will be happier for it, because it has literally been 12 years, 10 to 12 years of just whiplash from one extreme to the next, from one, a lot's happened. So it's just been a long road. Cayuga County. Another place where Democrats did really well. They took 5 out of the 7 contested legislature races, which impressive. They swept in Auburn. They won the mayor's and city council seats, both of them. This is where the examples of county clerk's race there was where the example of having a Republican and a conservative on the ticket split the vote, basically cleared way for the Democrat to win. Interesting stuff there. I think one of the big takeaways for me in Cayuga County, because there were clearer examples of it. Last time we did the show, I mentioned candidates who were pointing to big national issues and trying to make them part of their local campaign. The 2 candidates, from my point of view, who did that lost. And I think that's telling, because at the end of the day, when it comes to local government, people want their streets functional, clean. They want the garbage picked up. They want their infrastructure to work. And as much as it feels like sometimes these big national issues, what books are being banned, where, parroting some of the big congressional debates that we're seeing happen in DC, it feels like they are at times sucking the air or sucking all the life out of local politics. But at the end of the day, this election cycle in Cayuga County, to me, highlighted that local issues rule the day. They really do. I think that's a good thing.
I think that's an excellent thing, too. And I hope, I always say about Geneva that we're a little slow to follow what's going on, right? Like the housing bubble reached us, but later than it reached other places. Both the kind of the recession and then also the recovery, kind of it's a delayed reaction as to when it gets to Geneva. So I guess my hope is that seeing what's going on other places, that maybe Geneva will be able to make some progress sometime before too long in the not too distant future. We'll catch up with everybody. We'll come along. I just tend to be impatient, so I get upset if we miss a moment to really. And like you said, I do feel like time is running out on not allowing Geneva to fall behind. So I hope we catch up.
And if you're listening outside of Geneva, it's not just Geneva. There's a lot of places. Every community should be thinking about, how are we going to exist in 2040?
Right.
Okay. So a couple quick things to hit here at the end for us just quickly to talk about, I guess. Sodus Point Village Councilor-elect John Nesbitt, former Wayne County judge, passed away unexpectedly after winning election. We're going to have an appointment there. So the village board in Sodus Point will do that. It will probably happen within the next few weeks. They'll make the appointment official before the term actually begins, so the person can be integrated. Right, and a very sad outcome there. He had just retired from the bench within the last couple of years too, so a really sad situation there. Cayuga County Clerk-elect Brian Scanlan was ticketed for his role in a hit-and-run property damage accident. Another kind of weird, bizarre situation. I was reading some reporting by The Citizen this afternoon, and it seems like they're setting up for a bit of a political fight over that and what the consequences might be. Of course, for anybody listening or watching who's curious, you have to be convicted of a felony to actually be removed from office. And leaving the scene of a property damage accident is not that. It's a misdemeanor. So there wouldn't be any traditional cause unless, he were to resign or something like that, which I saw no indication that was going to happen. So we'll see how that, plays out over the next couple weeks. But interesting and poor timing, clearly, for him and for Cayuga County. Outgoing Ontario Town Supervisor Frank Robusto Jr. has been identified as the person who tried to bring a handgun through security at the Rochester airport last month. What are we doing?
I don't know.
What are we doing? It was in his carry-on bag, and, I listened to some talk radio this morning, and some folks tried to, make the argument maybe he forgot it was there, which I guess, maybe he forgot that it was there, but also at the same time, how do you forget that a pistol is like in your carry-on bag?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm old school. I'm very traditional. I feel like your elected officials should be like the chief rule followers of the, like I want to trust that my elected officials would get anxiety or guilt if they weren't abiding by the rules all the time. But I guess we're entering a kind of an anything goes era where people kind of, I don't know.
He is outgoing. He's
outgoing.
He's got another month in office, and then he will be out. This is the same town supervisor of whom his town board voted no confidence.
Right.
So there's that. Interesting too, I guess, because the more interesting thing to me, and one of the things I was listening to this morning, how was this not released? Like TSA, when they catch someone with a firearm going through security, they put out a press release. Mm-hmm. And I was looking back through press releases, and a lot of them don't have names. And they don't ever really identify name. The only reason the name came out in this instance was because his pistol permit was suspended, and it was basically a court document that went through Wayne County Court, and there are some dates coming up, and that's how the name wound up getting linked from incident A to court action B. So it was just kind of like a strange scenario. I feel like it may fall under similar grounds as to why state police don't release mugshots. So state police, because of policy, I think that's a Cuomo era policy, New York State Police stopped releasing mugshots. And I think there's probably somewhere along the line an argument of innocence until proven guilty and not identifying the individual involved in the incident before they have their chance to go through the process.
Right.
But very strange thing. Just probably should never happen. Hey, we did it. Election season is officially over.
We've made it through.
Mostly.
Yeah,
Election season isn't quite over yet in Geneva. We'll see how that pans out. We'll be back in a couple weeks with another episode. Until then, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we will see you next time.